those of us who are in England, the class system is very strong, and so if you're a bit of slightly, from a lower middle class background, and you're forced up through the class system, I think it gives you an eye on it, where you're in it but you're not in it. And yeah, I think that's been a big advantage to me as a writer. I've always felt in it and not in it. The 1950s in England, it's very hard to describe. Everyone was back from the Second World War, and the result was that they were traumatized. People in those days, didn't have the idea of post-traumatic stress disorder. No one who came back from the Second World War went into any kind of psychological training to recover from what they'd seen and heard. But plainly, people were very shattered by that war, and it made the atmosphere in England after the war very, very strange, very muted, very quiet. Everybody just very repressed. People having immense difficulty expressing themselves, and so, I knew I was living in a peculiar time and place, but I didn't really know why until I understood about the Second World War. All playwriting is a matter of fashion, and nobody remains in fashion for the whole of their life. If you are a playwright, you know that there are going to be times when you're popular and not popular, and that is true of every playwright. And John Osborne was a playwright who I felt had done an immense amount for the British theatre. He made modern playwriting possible for the British, and yet nobody, by the time he died, had a good word to say for him. And so I really spoke out for him because nobody else was speaking for him. And so it was, if you like, chivalrous. I wanted to defend somebody who was so out of fashion. I think when I was at university, then we all admired the work of the Royal Court Theatre because they were doing new writers like Osborne and Bond, and we thought they were very important. And but also I greatly admired Joan Littlewood. There was a woman called Joan Littlewood who was a director who created shows like Oh, What a Lovely War, and she had a radical working class theatre in the East End of London. The European cinema was the most exciting it's ever been. In every European country, you had great filmmakers, so what I really wanted was to go into the cinema. But the British cinema is permanently impoverished and is never in a very wonderful state, and it was in a particularly bad state at that time, so there were no jobs in the cinema. So I went into the theatre, but entirely on my own terms. I started with Tony Beaker. The two of us started a travelling theatre group, which didn't play in regular theatres at all, but which played in halls and prisons, army camps, and anywhere. It might have played. It would very happily have played in this space here, because we wanted to create a new kind of theatre, but more important, we wanted to have a completely new audience. And what drew me to it was that it seemed to me that it was the most vivid way of dramatizing what we thought were the hypocrisies and stupidities of British life. The British Empire had just come to an end in the last 15 years, virtually to an end in the previous 15 years. And yet the British were going on behaving as if they ruled the world when they didn't. And this seemed to us just ridiculous. Really, we wanted to satirize that pretentiousness in the English. I've written over 30 plays, but I've also written over 25 screenplays for television and the cinema. And so my life's been, in a way, equally divided between the two. But if I have any regrets, it's that there was a certain point where I could have either become a film director or continued as a playwright. And I didn't think it was possible to do both. And so I opted for the theatre as the thing that would take up most of my life and energy. And it's really only in the last 10 years with the Warwick trilogy and Collateral and the films that I've been writing that the cinemas loomed large in my life again. If you believe that art does change people, then you have to face the fact that there's more reactionary art than there is progressive art. You know, I did this series called Collateral, and Collateral, you know, a lot of people again have said to me, oh, it's wonderful, you've drawn attention to the evils of the detention system, whereby people are held without trial in detention centres in Britain. And a lot of people said to me, you know, I knew nothing about this. You know, your television series has revealed all this to me. You know, and yes, it does have an effect. But the Crown, you know, which is propaganda for the monarchy, or Downton Abbey, which is propaganda for aristocracy, equally has an effect. And I don't have anything like the viewing figures they have. So I think what you're more doing is putting down a marker and just saying, look, to all those of you out there who think differently, don't think you're going mad, because here is somebody who agrees with you. And so I think you can draw attention to certain things that are going wrong in society, and you can make a record about it so that nobody can say, oh, well, nobody, you know, the Iraq War was hugely popular in Britain at the time that it was launched, but there is a play called Stuff Happens. Now, Stuff Happens that play didn't stop the invasion of Iraq. It didn't do anything to change people's minds about the invasion of Iraq, but at least there is a record that at the time somebody said, no, this is a really terrible idea. When I directed the play King Lear, I directed Anthony Hopkins as King Lear, and of course I realized that what was moving in the play, or was really heart-wrenching in the play, was not the suffering of King Lear, but what was heart-wrenching was his courage in dealing with the suffering. And everywhere in the world, if you look at the plight of people in the world, you know, look at the planet from above, and there are 7 billion people on the planet. You know, 1 billion of them are doing really well, and 6 billion of them are doing not so well. Now, if you spend any time, you know, with the 6 billion, you will find that what is extraordinary about them is their resilience and their ability to get up every day and keep going and struggle on. And to me, this is intensely moving. And if you don't write about what extraordinary capacity human beings have for dealing with suffering, as well as write about their sufferings, then to me you're not telling the whole truth about humanity. And it's very hard to explain that the Palestinians and the Israelis move me very deeply and touch me very deeply. And the situation of the Palestinians and the situation of the Israelis both, I find deeply moving. And it just stirs something profound in me. And that artistic affinity is not an affinity you can choose. You can't explain why one subject seems likely to be dramatic and another subject not. People are constantly suggesting subjects to me that I turn out not to be interested in at all. And then suddenly just something in a tone or a visual image or a emotion will make me go, yeah, this subject is for me. And the Middle East is very much for me.